if you want to be this like profound spiritual visionary, the absolute worst thing you can do is rely on your feelings.
Right, which is just, I mean, it's a wild thing to say, isn't it?
It's a completely blunt, highly controversial, and frankly, just fascinating premise for our deep dive today.
Yeah.
Because we're looking at a system that basically says your gut instincts, your spiritual urges, they're completely useless unless you force them through a meat grinder of extreme systematic logic.
It is a phenomenal contradiction. I mean, we usually treat spirituality and rigorous, data-driven logic as, well, two completely opposing forces, right? Like one is the soul and the other is the machine. But the source material we're unpacking today argues that separating the two is exactly why most people never actually achieve their grandest visions.
Spot on. So we are diving into a text called the Divine Intelligence Life System Study Guide, or DIALS for short.
DIALS, yeah.
Authored by David Ordonez Reyes Rodriguez. And our mission today is to decode what the author calls thinking chemistry.
Which is such a great phrase.
Right. And it's not just some philosophical thought experiment. The guide claims to be a literal blueprint to transition you from someone who just has, big ideas into a creator of massive real-world impact.
Yeah. But to do that, it uses terms that sound completely wild at first glance.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, it talks about merging godlight insights with virtual 4D internet streaming.
Right, which sounds incredibly esoteric.
Right.
But when the text says virtual 4D internet streaming, it's not talking about, watching videos online.
No. It's essentially using a metaphor for the collective unconscious, but mixed with the endless data flow of the modern web.
Right.
It's the invisible, omnipresent cloud of human ideas, data, and potential. And the author's underlying thesis is that pulling an idea out of that cloud is really only step one.
Just the beginning.
Exactly. Unless that intuition is structurally anchored into physical reality, it evaporates.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can even talk about the daily routines this text demands, we really need to understand the ultimate goal here.
Yeah, the destination.
Right. The guide introduces a really sharp dichotomy right out of the gate. It contrasts what it calls a weak thinking dreamer, or a mystical dreamer, with a future builder.
Right. And to illustrate what a future builder actually is, the text points directly to historical master thinkers.
The heavy hitters.
Exactly. It specifically names Leonardo da Vinci, Nikola Tesla, and Isaac Newton.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the defining characteristic of these figures, according to the document, isn't just that they had big mystical ideas or, sudden strokes of genius.
No, it wasn't just lightning bolts of inspiration.
No, it's that they were relentless system builders. They had the persistence to turn abstract visions into concrete systems.
So to get you from being a dreamer to a Da Vinci, the text breaks the human mind down into this fascinating architecture made of 3 core layers.
So 3 layers? Yes.
First, you have the spiritual layer, which handles your intuition and divine guidance. Then you have the quantum or digital layer, which involves AI, information networks, and amplifying patterns. And finally, you have the physical or real-world layer, which is the actual projects and results. So for you listening, think of it like being an architect.
That's a great way to look at it.
The spiritual layer is that initial, sudden spark of inspiration. Like you close your eyes and you can just see a beautiful new building.
But you can't just hand a feeling to a construction crew.
Exactly. You can't. So you move to the digital layer, which is like using the 3D CAD software on your computer. You use the software to draft the physics of it, to figure out load-bearing walls, to organize the complexity that your brain literally cannot hold all at once.
Yeah.
And then the physical layer is actually going to the site and pouring the concrete.
What's fascinating here is why the text insists all 3 layers are absolutely mandatory.
Right. You can't skip one.
Exactly. If you only have the spiritual and digital layers but no physical layer, the text warns that you become trapped in what it calls weak theory thinking.
Weak theory thinking. Wow.
Yeah. You're just spinning your wheels in the abstract, drawing blueprints for buildings that will never actually exist.
Right. Just theoretical.
Right. To achieve true thinking chemistry, the system says you need 3 internal channels firing in a very specific sequence. You need the spirit channel, which provides your meaning and moral purpose.
Okay.
You need the mind channel, which handles your strategy and your digital tools. And crucially, you need the spiritual channel, which the text defines specifically as reality building, actually getting results in the physical world.
It makes complete sense in theory.
Yeah.
But, a mental model doesn't pour concrete.
No, it doesn't.
if the goal is to be this highly structured future builder, how does this system tell you to actually start your day? Because, I mean, this text is incredibly prescriptive about daily routines.
Oh, it is intensely prescriptive. The day begins with what it calls source alignment.
Source alignment.
Yeah, it's a morning practice that is surprisingly brief. It's up to 10 minutes.
Just 10 minutes.
It's just 10 minutes.
Yeah.
But those 10 minutes are an exercise in extreme concentrated focus. It involves making verbal declarations of your mission and taking in wisdom input from scripture or foundational texts.
And this is the part that really jumped out at me. It specifically mandates using visual monitors.
Yes.
Like the text talks about using devices, TVs, and AI internet streaming as virtual education monitors to visually lock in the intended outcomes of your day.
Right.
You are literally staring at digital representations of your goals to set your morning intention.
It's an intense sensory calibration. The goal isn't just to think about what you want to do. It's to flood your optical and auditory senses with the reality you are trying to build.
Wow.
And that calibration prepares you for the engine of the entire system, which is called the Spiritual Chambers Thinking Sequence.
Yes, the 5-step engine. The guide is adamant that every major thought has to go through this progressive funnel. Let's walk through it.
Sure.
So step 1 is perception, observing truths. Step 2 is interpretation, assigning strategic meaning to what you observed. Step 3 is intention, choosing a desired result. Step 4 is alignment, planning the disciplined steps to get there. And step 5 is manifestation.
Exactly. And to put that into a real-world scenario, so we aren't just, swimming in abstract terms, imagine you have a sudden spiritual urge to start a community garden in a neglected neighborhood.
Okay, great example.
The mystical dreamer just runs out, buys some seeds, and then gets completely overwhelmed when the soil is toxic and the city shuts them down.
Right, because they skip straight from perception to manifestation.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But using the spiritual chambers, you observe the truth the neighborhood needs fresh food. That's perception.
Okay.
You assign, meaning this requires community buy-in and city permits. That's interpretation.
Got it.
You choose the result, a fully funded legal garden within 6 months. Intention. You plan the steps, contacting local council, testing soil, raising funds. Alignment.
And then manifestation.
Only then do you plant the seeds. Manifestation.
So what does this all mean? I hear you, and the community garden example makes it sound very practical. But I really have to push back on this.
Go for it.
We are talking about a system grounded in divine intelligence and spiritual insight. If I have a genuine intuitive spark, running it through a rigid 5-step spreadsheet sounds like a fantastic way to just overanalyze it to death.
That's a common concern, yeah.
Doesn't this constant filtering just become an excuse for procrastination? Like, at what point are you just analyzing the magic right out of the idea?
That is the exact trap the mystical dreamer falls into, believing that structure kills magic.
Yeah.
But the text argues the exact opposite. It views this sequence as a necessary cognitive firewall. The system explicitly warns against emotional deceptions. Raw emotion, even if it feels profound or divine in the moment, is volatile.
But what if the emotion is the divine insight? If I feel compelled to help someone, I shouldn't need a 5-step strategic plan to just be a good person.
And you don't. The text actually distinguishes between micro actions and macro systems. Yes, help someone in the moment. But this guide is about building what it calls world government systems, which is its terminology for your macro destiny, your grand, complex life projects.
I see.
If you build a macro system based on a fleeting emotional state, you are building on a flawed foundation. The analytical sequence ensures that by the time you take physical action, your godlike insights have been thoroughly stress-tested by logic.
Right.
You aren't just reacting, you are executing a disciplined design.
Okay, I can accept that. It's protecting the inspiration from your own sort of emotional instability.
Exactly.
And speaking of executing a disciplined design, you really can't execute grand visions today without technology. We briefly mentioned using visual monitors in that morning routine, but this brings us to what I think is the most surprising element of this entire study guide.
The AI integration.
Yes, the deep structural integration of artificial intelligence. How on earth does digital tech fit into a text about divine intelligence?
It fits in through a concept the text refers to as the God-Universe Digital Quantum Mind.
Which sounds like a sci-fi buzzword salad.
It absolutely does. It sounds completely out there. But if we decode it, it's highly practical.
Okay.
The God universe represents the infinite potential of ideas and spiritual truths. The digital quantum mind is the technological network that can process, organize, and synthesize those ideas simultaneously.
So it's merging the two.
Right. Practically, the text describes this as a high-level thinking discipline used by innovators to align their internal insights with external AI tools. But it makes a crucial distinction.
Which is?
AI is not a replacement for human thought.
Yes, the guide is very firm on that. In fact, it refers to letting machines do all your thinking for you as cheap thinking.
Exactly. If you ask AI to tell you what your life purpose should be, that's cheap thinking. You've essentially outsourced your spirit.
So if it's not a replacement, what is it? Well, the text refers to AI as a thinking amplifier and a thinking genie engine.
A thinking genie engine, yes.
Its purpose is to organize complex ideas and amplify your pattern recognition. It pulls your visions from that virtual 4D internet streaming and helps you structure them so they can be brought into 3D physical reality.
And this amplifier is put to work daily in layer 4 of the system, which is known as the creation cycle.
Right, the creation cycle.
This is a 4-part progression. Vision, writing out your desired outcome. Design, breaking that vision into actionable steps. Build, doing the physical work. And review or improve, adjusting your approach based on reality. AI fits perfectly into that design phase.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's anchor this in a real-world modern example so you listening can actually use this today. What the guide is basically saying is, instead of staring at a blank page feeling completely overwhelmed by a massive intuitive idea, you use the tool to protect your energy.
Yes.
You dump a messy, chaotic 20-minute voice memo into ChatGPT. You pour all your intuition and godlike insights into it, and then you command the AI to extract a 5-step project plan, identify the logical gaps, and format it into a schedule. You let the machine do the tedious, cheap thinking of formatting so you can stay in the creative flow.
That is exactly the mechanism. If we connect this to the bigger picture and go back to the text metaphor of Nikola Tesla, this makes perfect sense.
How so?
Well, Tesla had profound visions of electrical systems, but he couldn't hold the entirety of a complex AC electrical grid in his working memory.
Sure, nobody could.
Right. He needed paper, math, and notebooks to structure it. Your brain literally cannot hold a grand life vision all at once. The inspiration hits in a flash, but the execution requires holding 1,000 variables.
That makes a lot of sense.
AI acts as external RAM for your spiritual intuition. By offloading the structuring to the Genie engine, your human mind is freed up to provide the moral and spiritual direction that the machine simply cannot generate.
It's a brilliant way to reframe our relationship with technology. You aren't surrendering to the screen, you're commanding it to draft the blueprints of your life.
Exactly.
But wait, this all sounds amazing when you're sitting in a quiet room meditating and chatting with an AI.
Sure, in a vacuum.
Right. But what happens on a random Tuesday afternoon when you hit a wall of burnout? Or when the project completely falls apart and you're just panicking?
Yeah.
The DL Sky doesn't just leave you hanging in the hyperdimension, right?
No.
It has very specific protocols for when things go wrong.
It does, because building these systems is biologically exhausting. When you inevitably hit a wall of stress, you don't need another AI tool. You need a physiological reset.
A reset.
Yeah, that's where layer 3 comes in, which the text calls the flow control method, operating in Zen Spirit Chi life force.
Okay, another phrase that sounds like it belongs in an old martial arts movie. Zen Spirit Chi life force.
I know, it's very evocative. But operationally, the text uses this to describe your biological and nervous system baseline. When stress spikes, your nervous system is basically getting fried.
You're overwhelmed.
Right. You lose the ability to maintain the thinking chemistry. So the flow control method gives you a precise 3-step deceleration technique.
Let's hear it.
Step 1, a breath reset. Step 2, a focus lock on a single specific task. Step 3, directing all your remaining energy to complete just that one task.
It forces you to shrink your world down. When the complexity of the macro system is causing you to panic, you don't look at the grand vision anymore. You look at one breath and one action.
Exactly. It gets you back in the zone.
But managing stress in the moment is only half the battle, right? The system also manages your overall trajectory through layer 5, the night reflection, which it also calls the feedback loop.
This is the mandatory end-of-day audit.
The audit, right?
The night reflection involves reviewing the day's successes and failures. you review the lessons you learned, and crucially, you review your bad choices.
Oh, that's tough.
It is. The text has a very specific phrase for what you are measuring here. It asks you to measure your distance from layers or liars' wrong influences.
Yes, measuring your distance from negative, deceptive, or misaligned forces in your life. And it's not enough to just think about this while you're brushing your teeth. You have to physically write it down.
Physical anchoring again.
Exactly. The text emphasizes that writing down these reflections locks in the learning. It physically adjusts your mental system to the next day.
Right.
But I have to stop and ask a highly practical question here.
Sure.
We've spent this entire deep dive talking about hyperdimensions, God universe, digital quantum minds, and spirit channels. But when you strip away the esoteric language and look at the actual daily requirements, a 10-minute morning alignment, a step-by-step logic filter for making decisions, a breathing technique for when you get stressed, and an evening journaling session to review your mistakes. Isn't the grand secret to divine intelligence actually just relentless, rigorous habit tracking?
This raises an important question, and honestly, it's a very fair critique.
Right.
On a mechanical level, yes, it is highly rigorous habit tracking, but the text refers to this entire interconnected structure as the divine genome.
The divine genome.
Yeah. Think about what a genome is in biology. It is the complete set of instructions needed to build and maintain a living organism.
Okay, I follow.
This system argues that your internal spiritual architecture actually requires this daily auditing to stay alive. It is the absolute symbiosis of the deeply mystical with the fiercely mundane.
Because without the mundane, without the concrete habit tracking and the evening journaling, the spiritual insights have nowhere to live.
Exactly. Without the physical container of those daily habits, the thinking chemistry breaks down entirely. Your grand visions just become daydreams.
Wow.
So yes, it's habit tracking, but it's habit tracking elevated to a spiritual discipline. You are proving your internal beliefs through your physical persistence in the 3D world.
You're treating your daily schedule with the same reverence you would treat a sacred text. Because your schedule is the only place where your spirit actually interacts with reality.
Precisely. That's beautifully put.
So, to bring this all together for you listening, the Divine Intelligence Life System is ultimately a guide about profound unification. It's about taking your spirit channel, which gives your life deep meaning and moral direction, and unifying it with your mind channel, where you use rigorous logic, strategy, and digital AI tools as your thinking genie engine.
Right.
And then it demands you channel both of those into the spiritual channel, which is the messy, heavy physical work of actually creating projects and solving problems.
It is a demand to stop being a mystical dreamer who only lives in their own head. And what's fascinating is that whether you lean heavily into faith or you consider yourself a purely analytical, tech-focused skeptic, there is immense value here. The text insists that your morning intentions, your smartphone, your stress breathing, and your evening journal are not separate, isolated compartments of your life. They are one continuous, integrated machinery designed to manifest your reality.
Which leaves us with a totally different way of looking at our future. Throughout this deep dive, we've talked about AI as a tool to handle our logical structuring, freeing us up to live in the spiritual visionary layer.
All right, the amplifier.
But consider this. If this system works perfectly, and we successfully offload all our complex structuring and planning to the genie engine of AI, what happens to the human mind over the next few generations?
That is the big question.
If the machine constantly translates our raw intuition into perfect logic, do we eventually lose our own human capacity for critical thinking altogether? Are we evolving into pure dreamers who are entirely dependent on the machine to build the world for us? Something to think about the next time you open up a prompt window.